And Cintac has been a partner of Data Access for 10 years, more than 10 years. My company represents me and some developers sitting in Hungary, together with our friend from Budapest. And we develop an application called Dynamic AI that most of you, or many of you, know about. Dynamic AI has always been kind of the awkward child at these conferences because we're not really based on Dataflex, but we kind of work together with the Dataflex application when we integrate Dynamic AI reports into applications.
It works now.
For many years now, usually I could say for 1 year or for 2 years, but now I have to say for many years now, we have worked on a new version of Dynamic. The existing version of Dynamic that you can buy and install and use today is called Dynamic version 6. And it is based on some kind of old technologies. I went through these at the EDUC. I won't spend that much time on it here. But I just want you to kind of get a picture of how many kind of technology changes we do from version 6 to version 7 to maybe get, I won't ask you to accept the fact that we haven't released version 7 yet. That would be a little bit too much. But if I can just kind of give you an idea of how difficult it is, so you maybe think that I'm not completely stupid. As you can see, we basically changed everything. And the one thing is to change a technology base. I think you might have experienced something similar yourself when you upgrade from native Dataflex to SQL Server-based Dataflex and maybe going from other applications into Dataflex, so you know what the game I'm in. But at the same time, we are also going from, and I didn't really realize that when we started the project, we go from some kind of conceptual, we do some conceptual changes. It's a difficult word. Version 6 is very much a pragmatic application. Dynamic AI was started 15 years ago. 15 years ago, we did a fully web-based application that was data-driven. We did form builder stuff that you could design your stuff in the browser. We did table entry, form entry, drag and drop, and drill downs and stuff like that 15 years ago. And kind of now everybody does it. But 15 years ago, we were kind of in the forefront and all of that. And at that time, there was nothing called, maybe there was, but I didn't know. There was not that many best practices around how to do web development. There were no, JavaScript was not very well supported across the different browsers. If you wanted to do something with animations, you had to do Flash. And a lot of those things have now changed. So we are now in an environment where there's a lot more capabilities in the standard browser today than there was 15 years ago. Developers like you demand a lot of features and a lot of interfaces and APIs that were not requested 15 years ago. And in order to kind of be more compatible with the request of you guys, we have to go from this very pragmatic and maybe unconventional way of doing things into something that is more conventional, schoolbook type, so that when you see something in our code, that you won't think, what's that? I think some of you, I can imagine a few, I know Johan had some experiences with that, who goes behind the code in Dynamic and try to look into that in order to adapt certain things. And if you're unexperienced, or just a mediocre experienced JavaScript and HTML, CSS developer, what you see in version 6 of Dynamic won't impress you. Let's put it that way. On the other hand, as I'm still a pragmatic guy, I must admit that, and that still it impresses me, because although we follow all these good conventions and best practices, the end result is, from the user's point of view, not very much different. We might be a few milliseconds faster, but the current version 6 is actually a pretty stable application. It's very fast, and it, over the years, have developed into something that is relatively intuitive. So our friend in New York, in the US, Bob, circle. He is kind of the Eddie of the US. He said it very nicely. He said version 6 has long legs. It's another expression I knew in Denmark, but I think he is definitely right. Anyway, I will show you a little bit of version 7 in a minute, but just to give you a hint of where we're going with this, is that we are moving from this kind of, just look at the screen and use it, don't ask too many questions world, into, okay, have a look and try to extend it world. So what we try to do is we try to create a dynamic that is much more compatible or attractive for developers to hook into. And also, I would like to be in the position, I don't know whether that will ever happen, but let's say that not in Synergy, but maybe the next Synergy, or the next SCANDUC, when I come up here, I want you to look up and think, that guy can definitely do JavaScript. And steal some of my code, or adapt it, or improve it. At the moment, that wouldn't be the case. Another little thing I want to say here on the conceptual plan, for the ones of you who are running Dynamic today, we have something where we can schedule reports so that they, every 3 hours or every Tuesday, will send a report. That scheduler in the old pragmatic Dynamic is actually just logging into the website as an agent and trigger the process of sending. So that means that you'll need to have a web server in order to trigger a report action. In the new dynamic world, the dynamic application can also be an executable. So you do not need a web server in order to trigger that the agent will send scheduled emails. You do not need a web server in order for the agent to create an export file. And when we get released and start working more into the details of this, it also means that you as Dataflex developers will be able to hook up to Dynamic without having a web server running. Meaning that you could pick up dynamically created report content and present that in your Dataflex applications without having the dynamic web server running. So there are some benefits of this technology change apart from some of the words and whatever sounds just pretty. And the last thing for you to maybe understand who I am, we used to be kind of the 80-20 company. If you had a problem, we could solve it like that, or 80% of it at least. And we were pretty fast and pretty good at adding new functionality to Dynamic. I would say that until a few years ago, with Dynamic, you would generally get a very fast and flexible feedback from us in terms of when you needed some new special feature, we would be able to add it quickly to the application. And that hasn't been the case for all this version 7 development. You have got nothing. But that was really because we were kind of in this 80-20 world. If we could do something that would be, 80% good for everybody, we would put it in. And the last 20% where you had to be conventionally correct and make sure that it would be unit tested and blah, 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 we didn't really do. And we are doing that now. So the new Dynamic version 7 is much more consistent. It's normalized behind, there's foreign key tables and God knows what, everything is data type checked and blah, blah, blah. It's much more a stable, conceptually environment. And therefore, I think it will also be another class of application than what you were used to from version 6. Again, just why do we do these things and why do I mention these conventional things? It is to improve the maintainability and extensibility of Dynamic. And it is also to create a dynamic version for the future, meaning that the fewer dependencies we have in the old version Dynamic, we had to run on a Windows server. We had to have Internet Information Server with ASP installed. In the new Dynamic version, you can run on Linux, you can run on Mac OS, you can run Apache, you can run IIS. There is no dependency to the web server you run. As I said before, it will also be available as an executable. Therefore, you will also be able to execute Dynamic on a non-internet server-based machine. Not that we do have a stability problem, but of course, all of these things is also going to improve the stability in, on a high load and on Dynamic. And one thing that I dare to say now, because we are not very far from releasing version 7, The security of version 6 is okay. You don't have to be afraid. But over the years, again, as I said, 15 years ago, nobody had talked about SQL injects. So the way we do things when you input parameters in version 6 is that we analyze the input that you do, and we unquote it and make sure that there's nothing that can damage the database that goes through the user interface. But that's not the right way of doing that. The right way to do absolutely fully secure SQL manipulation dynamically is to do binding, where you bind the parameters that the user input into executed SQL statements. And that sounds like a small change, but when you do it across the whole damn thing, it's a lot. You need to kind of build up your whole application in another way. And we have done that from the ground up in version 7. One of the reasons I've asked myself many times, why the hell does such a simple application take so long time to deliver? And one of the things that I've realized is that an old dream we had 15 years ago when we built Dynamic the first time was that Dynamic should be so dynamic that we could create Dynamic with Dynamic. And at the time, it kind of was hurting in our head, and we had to give up. And then we made some static frames and static interfaces and whatever, and then we used that to create dynamic content. I realized recently that something like the data access report writer is actually also partly written in Dataflex, isn't that correct? So, you are an example of a company who have an application that is used to create itself. And I'm a little bit doing the same thing with Dynamic version 7. It's a framework and a library of functionality that will be used also to be the interface to create dynamic reports. Not only your reports, but also to design the report. The designer in Dynamic is created dynamically. And that's also why it sometimes there's a little bit, a lot of dependencies, and when I change a little thing, it has global impact. So it's about getting these fundamentals right, and when those are right, then we will be able to release, and we will get a product that will stay for a while in the same structure, and we will be able to add new features to it without having to change everything all the time. Let's take a look at it. I worked for a company called Arthur Andersen 20 years ago. Arthur Andersen had a tech, or whatever you call this, saying, where they said, you should always meet your client, you should exceed client expectations. And that way we could win the clients and be a wealthy big company. And in the end, we know what happened to Arthur Andersen. So I don't know whether that's a good approach, but I always lived to the expectation, after that principle, that I wanted to exceed the expectations of people. In this specific case, I'm a little bit under pressure, because I think that many people here today expected that I would release something, and as I'm not releasing something, I can't meet that. I can't exceed that expectation. So what you're going to see now is something that is not finished. It's not polished. There's definitely UI changes to be made. But I will show you principles of what I just mentioned before. And I will try to demonstrate for you the, let me see whether this works. Go back. Here the structure of Dynamic is basically that the application framework where you're going to run your reports and where you're going to do designs and whatever is based on a relatively few number of controls. So if you're used to work with the web framework in Dataflex and you work with web controls like calendar control or schedule control, you know what I mean with controls. And that's, such a control is kind of an isolated little thing that you can apply to an application. And the new Dynamic is basically having a navigation control, a form control, a list control, and a report control. And I will show you examples of that now in the live Dynamic. But as you can see here, it is based on elements that are organized into cards or into templates, or controlled by templates. And that's the whole idea, to create a basically kind of a model view controller kind of application where the data comes from the dynamic server. The design will dynamically also come from the dynamic server, but it will go into the view part of the model view controller, best practice modeling, and the result that you will see in the UI will be a combination of a model that is separated from the view. Meaning that it is much easier to change the viewing and formatting of things without affecting the data and the other way around. And before I'll say this now and I will try to repeat it a little bit later. Because we are using dynamic to create dynamic. It also means that when you get dynamic version 7, you get up and running, and you get your reports up and running, and we're fine. You will actually be able to, from Dataflex, to manipulate dynamically the design of the report that is running, which is a capability we couldn't do before. Meaning that there will be an XML language with these kind of controls that you can manipulate depending on your usage. We have a customer in Australia called Triumph. Isn't that correct? Isn't he from Australia? Triumph is building a front end for some auto industry thing. And they have a lot of different customers that they need to implement the dynamic installations to. And they are asking for ways to parameterize the call to the dynamic report so that various columns are hidden and stuff like that. We can actually do that today with a role feature in the old version of dynamic, but here we would not only would we be able to remove columns, we would be able to group and add different levels of a report, multiple drill downs, change form layouts, charts, whatever, programmatically at the time when you execute the report. I think that will open up a lot of new things with dynamic. Okay. As in the old version, version 6, we have a user that is used to log into dynamic, and one of my key work kind of methods here is that keep it simple. So, you know, what you will see here is pretty straightforward and pretty simple, and it should be kept that way. We have a left side here, which is a navigation. The navigation can be manipulated by clicking on the various structures in this menu, and you would be familiar with all of that. And if we take it from the bottom, if we take something simple as your administrator profile, if you click on that, you'll get a form presented here on the right side that presents your settings, what's your name, what's your default language and number format and stuff like that. You know from the old dynamic, something we have called user administration, where we have different user groups that can be including different members. We have the users themselves that can be organized here in different tabs with the user rights, the user groups they are members of and all that. I don't want to train you in how to use dynamic here. I'm just going to give you a quick glance around. And then we have the system settings where we control SMTP, LDAP, stuff like that. This style setups. And if we go into the database bit, we define a dynamic connection. And pretty much like John was talking about, this is like your connection ID. You know, we define a connection that is stored in the dynamic report repository, and that connection ID is then globally used across all the different reports. And if you define an alternate connection for such a connection, you can also do one-time switching of connections on a report if you want to. So there's a lot of similarities actually to what you're doing in Dataflex as well in terms of the usage of this. We also have the encryption issue behind and stuff like that. When you have a database connection, you can browse the different tables of the database like we're used to. And when you are on a table, you can click to the lowest level and get an automatically created report, form. And if we go further here, we have SQL views, for example, that can be parameterized. So we are editing SQL. We have parameter maintenance, and you can preview and whatever. And as you can see, when I walk around here, move around here, this is pretty much the same thing. I changed the colors a little bit. Nigel and I have a long debate about that. But in principle, I'm using it all the time from the left side of the menu. I click to the issue I want, bring it up on the right side. There's tabs, and there's the various elements I mentioned before, forms, reports, and lists. And when I have a list on the screen here, I can do my usual drill down. and the drill down moves into various tabs. I can move back and forward here, which is one thing you can't do in version 6. You can only do one down and then it will write all the time the next drill down. And when you get to the lowest level, you get to the form, where you can see the details of the full record if you are interested in that. One of the things that I'm struggling with at the moment is to find a good place for the filters for such a report. So this report, for example, has a filter for the year that we would like to put. And until recently, we were presenting the filters on the left side of the screen, but it gave you a very deep, group, category, report, filter. So it gave you a very long, deep tree to get down to that filter thing. And now I'm playing with the idea of actually having them up here on top of the reports, and we'll figure out to make that pretty. Nigel likes that green. I don't really like it. But otherwise, that report setup is similar to what you've seen before. We have already began to think about new things we could do, like something we called embedded drill down. So instead of having the tabs, we would kind of embed and open up, animated the drill down in the specific cell we're doing. And there will be options like that when we're finished playing. I'm running out of time, but I will show you just a little bit to get back to why we are doing all of this. Do I have 5 minutes more?
Yeah, you have.
Ah, okay. I don't want to go back here. Actually, I want to go there. You can see here, if we take the form as an example, the form that you get presented in dynamic, and let's take the user profile as an example. Such a form is actually consisting of a template with some cards on it, which can take elements, and there could also be kind of listings and stuff like that. But let's take the simple example, a form which have a template of how to view, how it would look in view, and the elements on that will be cards, organized into cards. Let's look at how that is actually done. I run the administrator. It is has a specific object type called profile, and that profile, I already did that here, is called from the menu. I'm getting over. This is the menu, and the menu is having a line here called administrator node type profile. You can see that there. This is just a big XML file. That big XML file is generated dynamically when the user logs into the system. So depending on who is logging in, you will get that whole left side of the menu designed differently. In this case, you saw that there was an administrator. That's actually this line here. So when I click on that, the JavaScript library will go and look for the template for the profile. The templates are downloaded also, and they are available in XML format. And you can see I have a template here for the profile. And as you can see, there's profile, DAO object profile, there's a tab called profile with a header group, account identification, with UI name and UID email and password. So if we go back to the user interface itself, you can see I have my full name here, I have the email, and I have the password. Let's say, it's a stupid example, but let's say I would like to move the password to the preference group instead. What would that require? It would require that you're modifying the template. I've loaded the template here in Google. And I'm just going to remove the field for password from one place down to here. And save. And if I reload, and then administrator, the password is moved down there. And that's not wow, but what I'm just showing you here is just to show you the element kind of, the dynamic nature of this. So when you see at the bottom of a report, you go and take a completely brand new connection and you click to a table, contacts in this case, and you click down and you get a form up here. That is generated dynamically like that. Now we can manipulate that with a lot of rules. But in the end, we're just moving those elements around. And depending on the type of the element, you could see that the password was a type P, TPP. P has got some functionality. The functionality in the case of P is that we can hide the password. So when I type in here, it comes like that. And then you can click out here and see what you were typing, instead of having the two thing or retyping thing. So, you know, that is, so the controls that we have here, you can call them, it's a dynamic library of controls that are rich in terms of dynamic functionality. And if you click up here, and you get a pop-up with a list of issues or options, again, in the library behind, you will see that is because it's a special type that has a reference where you can go down and find the underlying options. That's the principle of it. So when we finish, you will get a dynamic as we had in version 6. You install it, blah, 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 blah. You get up and running, you can connect your report, you can do all the stuff you usually do. But you also have the possibility of going in, extending the template library, modifying the templates, creating new types, and dig into the JavaScript. I haven't fully decided whether we will minify it or not. Let's see. But that's definitely, from a technical point of view, it will be possible and would be the way we should go forward. Okay, just finishing. Basically, if you look in the future, what was dynamic in the past? It was an end-user driven and data-driven experience. So depending on who was logging in, they could do what the data allowed them to do. We want to carry that forward into the future. And basically by bringing version 7 in, with a lot of extension capabilities, we will allow, let's just imagine that I only did version 7 like I described before. I didn't do anything more. And then Johan, being a machine learning, interesting guy, he comes up and thinks, okay, I would like to actually use the dynamic application to feed a machine learning application and get predictions back. You will be able to take information out of dynamic from the XML, post it to the prediction library, or engine, sorry, get the results back, collect it in dynamic, post it to the dynamic server, and use that from your application. What if we all have to wear special glasses in a few years where we have our interface to things? How would that work? Do we then have to do dynamic version 8 and wait 5 years for that? No, because then what we can do is we can take the XML interface we already have and create a front end that just fits to this AR or VR experience. What if we all need to have some sort of connection into the talking agents we all have? Siri and Google have their AI on their new Pixel phones, Microsoft has Cortana. How do we do when we say, okay, what's my revenue today? Dynamic server had no idea. But if one of you guys come up and say, okay, I know how to write an API from the Google engine into something that I can actually programmatically hook into, then you would be able to log into Dynamic, pick up the correct reports, look for the totals, because the totals are in XML. They're not on a pixel report where you have no idea. So that's the reason why it has, why we're doing it like that. So moving away from pragmatic into schoolbook, good best practices, that's what you're going to get from version 7. And before you ask, as soon as possible. No, but it's close. We're close.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.